projects in food and beverage facilities usually mean short turnaround time and a special focus on cleanliness. Today, we'll talk to our resident food and beverage coating expert to see what other things contractors should keep in mind when working inside of processing facilities, especially the need for FDA and USDA compliance. Welcome to Coatings Decoded. I am Mark Thomas, and today I'm joined by Dan O'Toole. Dan is the sales director for Tnemec Company and handles manufacturing and processing facilities. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
So Dan, let's talk about some of the critical items for industry compliance, facility cleanliness, in food and beverage plants. And let's start with one really critical issue that I think a lot of confusion is around, and that is the role that FDA plays concerning the coatings for food and beverage plants.
Well, Mark, that's probably the biggest question I get fielded from the field, whether it's a coating specialist from Tnemec or a plant owner, or most often through a contractor. And that's, what do I use here? Is it a USDA or is it an FDA coating or lining system that I need here? And I think I'd like to just start with the FDA portion of it. And the FDA is basically the governing body for the food safety codes. They set the safety codes. They set the CFR standards. And the most latest edition was published in 2017, and it's not much different than the previous ones before that. And so the USDA then follows their recommendations and the code standards for these antipathogens and keeping these plants clean and safe. Now, the FDA is a division of the Health and Human Services Division, and it's been around for quite a while, but it most frequently involves us as coatings manufacturers when it comes to direct food contact. So if you have a tank lining that's going to be in direct food contact, whether it's a beer fermentation tank or starch processing or something like that, that is a direct food contact lining. And it has to be compliant to this FDA standard. And the reason why is because it comes in food contact, it could become what they call an indirect additive into the food source. There's always a possibility of that. And so that's why you have to be very careful with manufacturing your linings. And we're all still operating as coatings manufacturers back in the late 1950s when the FDA looked into acceptable types of linings and materials and raw materials that could be used for cans, for processing cans where food was put into, but it also applied to reusable containers, which is what we deal with in the coatings industry, which is tanks and vessels that are processing the food. And so what they did is they went out to the manufacturers of these linings and they looked at the list of ingredients and they came up with an acceptable list of ingredients you can use to formulate coatings with. Now, there's many, many linings out there that can be used within our company and other companies to work in a beer tank or a flour bin or something like that. But if they're not made with the appropriate materials, they cannot be used. One other big misconception out there is that FDA approves these linings. There is no approval by the FDA. There is no website you can go to and find whose coatings or linings are approved by them. We have to be compliant. The standard is set, and that standard is 21 CFR 175.300 for resinous and polymeric coatings. That's a fancy term for it. And that list what you can formulate with, that list how much of those raw materials you can put in there. And you have to follow that. And it's kind of a three-step process. So that's what we do as a manufacturers. We manufacture with those GRAS, generally recognized as safe ingredients. We make sure we don't put more in it than what the book allows us to put in. And then we have to check the vendors to make sure the vendors who are sending us those raw materials are also FDA compliant to this 175-300 standards. Then lastly, what you have to do is go through extraction testing. And extraction testing is basically where we determine what the food service is going to be. Like, how is it being made? Is it in a hot tank? Is it being pasteurized? So that's the condition of use. Then you also have the food types. Is it a 5% alcohol material? Does it have butter fat in it, or ingredients like that? So you have to do extraction testing to meet those food conditions as well as those types of foods. Now, we feel it's best to have a third party review everything we do, vet our formula, make sure there's no new FDA, what they call FCN, food contact notifications to these raw materials. So they look at our formula, they look at who we're using, they vet them for efficacy and acceptability, and then they do the extraction testing. So what we get at the end of the day for our owners and our clients for a direct food contact tank lining is we get a third-party opinion that this is certified to conform to the FDA standard. So it's not just on the product data sheet by Tnemec. You've got backup as an owner. I kind of like to call it your get out of jail card. So if things start tracking back and a food recall, don't go looking at the tank lining because there's a third party acceptability on this material. So that's the FDA portion of this, Mark.
So obviously that's pretty critical that it meets those requirements. And you'd mentioned a data sheet should state that. Is there some other type of documentation or assurance that a facility owner or a contractor should look for?
Well, actually, one thing I did leave out is that the FDA requires a letter of guarantee. So if a food safety inspector says, I want to see what you're putting in that tank for a lining as you do the rehabilitation or you propose to put in there, I want to see it on the manufacturer's letterhead that this is compliant to the FDA standard 175-300. So on the data sheet, you should have not only that it's compliant, you should have the conditions of use we discussed, you should have the food types that are acceptable. But in addition to that, you have that third party specialist, who has reviewed all of it and certifies. They certify that you've met the compliance. So that is very helpful to have that as backup for the owner, and there's safety for everyone, the contractor, the owner. And we're getting so much more involvement now with the food safety specialists in these food plants and the project managers and engineers. They want that involvement. Their concern is this lining going to work in this application? And we get that. But it's a bigger issue here that you're putting the correct linings in these applications for that condition of use and those food types.
So that's FDA direct food contact. And then how does USDA factor into this?
Well, USDA basically follows follows the food code that's set up by the FDA. And the USDA, they're not a department; they're separate. The United States Department of Agriculture, but they are a wholly separate owned operation out of the government agency, and it's 150 years old. It was actually formed during Lincoln's administration. And we get involved with them. They became way more active in the protein plants around World War II when new proteins were coming to market, like lamb and chicken was becoming big, and seafood too. And so they were doing way more inspections in the food plants during World War II and forward. Now, when the USDA is in there, they're not looking at direct food contact linings other than if they demand that letter to know that what you're putting in there is acceptable. What they're interested in is anything that could indirectly contaminate that food source. And so they're really looking at pathogens, bacteria, cleanliness. And the USDA actually, the division you see that actually is going in and walking around these food plants is called the FSIC, Food Safety Inspection Services, FSIS. They may have the white cap on with USDA on it, but that's actually the group that does it. And if they see something they don't like a divot in the floor that's holding water that could hold bacteria, they're going to talk about it. They see things on the ceiling that looks like it's not clean. They're going to want to know, what are you going to do about that? So they follow, again, the food safety standards set up by the FDA. And those basically start with the construction. So, so you got to you got to build a wall out of something that's robust, that will hold up to cleaning and so forth. But you also have to make it, and this is verbiage per the code, it has to be sealed, smooth, and easily cleanable. So they're looking for that on walls. They're looking for that on floors. They're looking for that in ceilings and even on equipment.
So it sounds like FDA, just in general terms, FDA is associated with the direct food contact, which would probably be more of a tank liner type of situation. USDA is concerned about cleanability and sort of fitness for the use of whatever environment that's going into. So it could be a floor coating, a wall coating, a coating on equipment. That's something that's easily clean, that's not going to harbor any type of harmful bacteria or pathogens.
That's correct. And they do not require a letter of guarantee, but it's almost always asked for. Something on the vendor's letterhead that this is acceptable for USDA service, meaning, indirect food contact, or incidental, I should say, incidental food contact. But will this hold up and will this be cleanable for this service? And so even though it's not required, it's almost always demanded by that USDA FSIS inspector. Now, I think we're really fortunate at Tnemec in that we can quickly give these recommendations, or you can actually kind of make your own recommendation whether you're a specifier or a plant owner. If you have our food guide for system recommendations, anything in our system recommendations within those plant locations, if it says it's a microclean system, microclean means we will write a letter saying this is a USDA compliant system for where you're at and where you're using it.
I know anytime that hygiene in a facility comes up, cleanliness comes up, it's often followed by questions about antimicrobials that are sometimes added to coatings to perhaps help with that situation. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, let's throw one more party in here. The EPA. The EPA actually handles that portion of the business in plants, because antimicrobials and biocides and that they're considered a pesticide, and so they fall under the EPA purview. Now, again, we're very fortunate here at Tnemec to have a very in-depth environmental group who really know their business with these materials and so forth, and the FDA, the USDA, but this gets even a little bit more complicated, of course. And we do use antimicrobials in some of the Tnemec materials. We'll talk about a little bit later. But we use them in a fashion that EPA allows for. There's another CFR code, it's number 40 and subsection 152. What that means is that we can take that antimicrobial and we can put it in our coatings if we use it the way it's intended by the manufacturer, okay? And the EPA is really not big on field additives of these things. There's the obvious abuse, right? Now, if 2 drops will do it, 14 will be better. No, that's not the right thing to do. So we put our antimicrobial materials, when desired and when asked for, in the coatings during the time of manufacture. And then that way, when they go to the field, they're the proper amount. The on-label use basically means, in the way Tnemec promotes their products, for example, like our Ultra Tread, which has the antimicrobial in it, is basically that antimicrobial is not going to pop out and kill COVID or something else there. All it's there to do is to protect that topping on the floor from degradation from bacteria. So if you keep that surface nice and tight and not eaten up by bacteria or other bad pathogens that could be in there, you have a smoother, more cleanable, USDA compliant type surface, and that's why the antimicrobials there.
Okay, so in general, antimicrobials aren't really there to kill off all kinds of bad materials. It's there to protect the film, make it easier to clean, maintain that hygienic condition of the facility. And immediately, floors come to mind because they get beat up all the time. There's a lot of things falling onto them. What can you comment about floors and facilities and some of the major problems and concerns that facility owners encounter?
Right. Well, there's the whole big issue of the ceilings, the walls, the floors, and everything else. And, as an owner of a plant, you want something that's going to work, be efficient, do a good job, and last a long time. And of course, money is always a concern. If you're a contractor, a specifier or a builder, you're looking for turnaround time, ease of application, and of course, cost savings. And also low odor if you're in situ, doing maintenance in those plants. So all these things have to come into consideration when we're talking about these systems going forward in these plants. I always like to start with, the walls and go down. And, walls can harbor pathogens. I mean, concrete block is a very robust, sturdy building material, so it hits the FDA food code. However, it's porous and it can harbor bacteria and it's hard to clean. So we have systems like what's called strand lock, which are just outstanding. I mean, we can take every nook, every cranny, every crevice out of that wall, make that super smooth. We can coat it and top coat it with films that will keep their color stability, which is kind of special in the industry. There's been a lot of wall systems that have very good epoxy surfaces on them, and they're white today, and then tomorrow or a couple of days or 3 months down the road, they're all yellowed and the food owner isn't happy. They're also very resistant to not antimicrobials, but cleaning and sanitization, hot water, and so forth. So the strand lock systems actually build with a glass mat sheet into it. So it bridges over all the cracking and so forth. And so those are one of the more outstanding systems. And once you do a wall with a strand lock system, it's there for quite a while and very little maintenance to it. And that makes people happy. Installation costs are going to be a bit higher, but your long-term return is much better on a wall with the strand lock system.
Being in the coatings industry, I think it's the first question when you're trying to think of a coating recommendation or a solution is what's the environment? What's going to be exposed to? What kind of abuse is it going to have to withstand? And you had listed hot water washdowns, high pressure washdowns, some of the cleaning agents that are commonly used. Those would all be questions that need to be answered before a recommendation really could be made.
Yeah, the best information you can get, the most information you can get about the service conditions are going to help you and direct you into the least expensive system for the owner. We're not, trying to gild the lily here. If something a little bit less will work, if it's a tilt-up wall and it's not concrete block, there's other systems, or if it's in an area of the plant that, you don't suspect it's going to have a lot of washdowns, but so we can use, quote, a little lesser system there because it just doesn't demand it. And it'll still be a micro clean, we'll still be able to give a USDA letter on it that it's acceptable. But I always let the, kind of advise everybody, well, this area of the plant today, maybe, egg crate storages, but next week it might be with an expansion, it might become the process system. So you only get a first crack on that wall one time. So we want to go with the best systems we can afford and be appropriate. But you're correct, because different clients have different needs. In the dairy market, for instance, they use a lot of sanitizers that have phosphoric and sulfuric acid in them. And that's fairly aggressive too. And sometimes they slop it all around, carry it in buckets and so forth, and it drips on the floor. And anybody who's been around sulfuric acid knows it'll turn surfaces red. So how important is stain resistance? And we certainly have toppings that can go on these floors that are probably a bit overkill, but because they're a Novolac epoxy, like our 239, it will resist that staining for hours if you don't get to the cleanup. So again, the case history or the intended usage is always important to make a good, solid recommendation.
So you've talked about flooring systems, wall systems, and of course, often a neglected area is the ceiling, but that can be critical there as well. What kind of systems or considerations need to be made for the ceiling system?
Well, we have a lot of recommendations for ceilings in our guide, and you can go onto our website under guidelines and hit the processing and manufacturing. You can pull that up, and we list ceilings, all different types and all different systems. And it depends upon the area of the plant, of course. I mean, if you're over open kettles, that are producing maize or, butters or things like that, you got to have yourself a very, very clean and very robust ceiling on top of there. If you're expecting a lot of steam to waft up into those areas, again, the same thing. So we have higher performing systems, but we also have lots of systems that are very inexpensive, but keep it nice and clean up there. And, we'll accept cleaning on every couple weeks basis. And they're called like spray dry falls, like our Spray Safe 30 is an outstanding one. We have ones like our 115 Unibond that will coat over every kind of multiple substrate. You have it up in a ceiling because there's conduit, there's galvanized, there's plastic, there's steel, there's galvanized decking and pre-finishes, and they'll stick to about everything. So the ceilings have, really, really great options for them too. And just kind of doubling back to the floors one more time. I mean, the floors are the biggest concern. When a food inspector's in there, if the floors aren't in good condition, he's thinking the rest of the plant's got a problem. So the go-to product for Tnemec usually, and in every food plant, pharmaceutical, beverage, whatever, is the polyurethane cement. And I failed to mention our Ultra Tread is just outstanding. That I don't know, maybe it's millions of square feet over the years that we've had installed with our Ultra Tread are just performing greatly, and they go down easy, they go down fast. And they have quick turnaround service. They got great thermal shock resistance, which you need in a food plant. And recently, we rolled out the bulk packaging method where our carbon footprint is reduced tremendously. These polyurethane cements, I don't know if you've ever seen them on a job site, Mark, but they multiple buckets, multiple bags. The trash you create on a large job is just phenomenal. By buying it in bulk, shipping to the job site and using reusable totes, we save the contractor and the owner a lot of time and money, and we're a good steward by doing that as we move forward in the industry. So I encourage everyone to look at some of our Ultra Tread case histories around the website. It'll fit for your food, beverage, or pharmaceutical plant nicely.
So floors are probably the obvious place. The inspector comes in and looks down and sees issues there. Maybe an area that is still a headache to the facility manager, but not nearly as obvious when you first walk in, might be areas that are condensating. Maybe there's moisture present. And there are traditional insulation materials that could be used to help with condensation control, even keeping things warm for a process. But what kind of coatings technologies are out there that can help with that?
Oh, that's a great question. And we've got the answer to that at Tnemec. We have a product called Aerolon that is just state-of-the-art, direct-to-metal insulative coatings. And in these food plants, there's a lot of steam. You get frying conditions. You get just moisture everywhere, constant cleaning. You get elevated temperatures. And what the Aerolon insulated material does is a spray on. You don't have to pull the old wool off. You don't have to put stainless steel cladding on and so forth. You can put it directly to the metal. With having that contact directly to the metal, you eliminate, the opportunity for, wet. You have wet insulation, doesn't work anymore. You have wet insulation, you have bacteria potential growth. So you have it in direct contact to the steel. And what you get out of Aerolon is you get three multiple functions. You can use it for worker safety protection. We did some fermenters in a wet car milling plant where the top of the surface was very hot, and we used that for worker protection. So that worked out great. We also use it to stop the condensation, as you mentioned about the dripping off of pipes in a plant. That's a nuisance and it's a problem. It's a potential harbor of pathogens in that plant. And then the third use for it, of course, would be to retain heat in a vessel. So by doing all this, you can put it right on directly to the steel and you get in and out much quicker. You can also do equipment or vessels that require insulation off-site. So you don't have that problem or concern with spraying within the plant. So the Aerolon just really does a great job for condensation control, for worker safety protection, and of course for retaining heat. It's also available in a tape form. So if you've got smaller jobs or piping that are harder to get to, you can wrap it with the Aerolon tape. We've got an entire division that handles Aerolon. Two guys work in that program, and they've forgotten and know more about Aerolon than I'll ever know. And we can pull them at any given time to help out. As a matter of fact, they've got these crazy little blue monitors that they can actually put on pipes, and they're inexpensive, and they can record data on a smartphone, and we get a great profile. So we can give a great specification that we think will help this owner on this pipe service. And sometimes we got to say, hey, it takes so many mils of this, forget it. Maybe you got to go back to the old insulation or use different water, but at least we can give them an accurate recommendation as to how many mils of Aerolon you need to take care of this problem.
Well, with Aerolon and gaining that information, the temperatures, the humidities, the operating temperatures of the equipment is critical. And really, to go into a facility, you really, to make a reliable, high performance recommendation, need to get as much information as possible. What are those service conditions? What are the environmental conditions? What kind of abuses or chemicals might it be exposed to? And that first conversation and walk through with the facility manager probably is critical to gain that information.
It really is. And I've already thought of another one I forgot, thermal breaks with this. And we're walking through a bakery the other day, and we're looking up there, and he goes, look at this. He's talking to our coating specialist and says, what I got all this corrosion coming through because it's cold on this side, and I got the heat in the bakery here, and it's all wet, and look at that rust. We got that covered. That's Aerolon. No, very, very low odor to it. Very easy to apply. Doesn't need special equipment, and we're able to solve those thermal break problems within that plant. There's been some people call it witchcraft, out there, and there's been a lot of claims by a lot of insulative companies with cork in it and this and that and so forth. But we want to be upfront. We want to be as honest as we can. If where we can help, it can help. It's not a single bullet for everything, but Aerolon really is a problem and time saver in a plant that has condensation issues.
So let's talk about the expectations of the owner, because that's critical to make sure that they're going to get what they want. And also, what are the expectations, not only of the performance of the systems that are installed, but the installation themselves? When I'm sure a facility owner for an existing facility that needs some kind of renovation, rehabilitation is concerned about nearby occupied space, disruption to their process, downtime. What are some of the things that coatings selections can do to help minimize some of that?
Well, some of the things we can do is, everyone likes to spray. It's faster, it's more convenient. You get a more uniform coating. No pinholes usually, that's best. But a lot of times we've got to think through this thing with our field coating specialists and the contractor and the owner and get that case history, what we're doing here, moving forward, as you had asked about earlier, Mark. And they may say, I've only got 3 days. You can have it on Friday. I need it back on Monday. Okay. It's 25 degrees in here. Can we do something about that temperature? Yeah. I can get you to 35. Oh, great. Okay. So now we know that. So now we need to design with a lower temperature, faster curing, can't spray in there. I'm told, it's just going to get everything messed up. So we need a rollable material. So we're putting all this into the equation. Well, how fast can we turn around this without sacrificing performance? For instance, we do a lot of insulated metal wall cladding in plants, very big over the years being put in there, but the pre-finishes on them don't look so good. They have some issues with the seams, moisture getting behind it, bacteria. What can you do for us? Well, we have quite a few different microclean systems that will adhere to those panels. We have lots of case histories with them. And then we put a very good washable top coat on it. And most of that's all low to no odor at all within the plant. So you can work while operations are going. But again, we want to talk to that owner and say, are those totes of raw chicken going to be in here while we're working, or not? So that's, how much time do we have? What do you expect out of this job? And then we'll design a system for the owner.
Okay. Well, Dan, we've covered a lot. We talked about FDA direct food contact, USDA non-direct food contact. We talked about the EPA and biocides. We went through floor, wall, ceiling, insulation, coating systems that are options. Any parting thoughts before we leave?
No, not at all. And not too much to add to this other than, we hope that our clients, whether you're the owner, the specifier, or our contractors who we rely so much on to do this, do our materials well. We make first-class materials at Tnemec. We wouldn't be in business for 100 years if we didn't. We've been in the food, beverage, and pharmaceutical industry for so long. We have so much case history, but we're only as good as that person putting it on for us. And we really do, rely on our contractors to work with us as partners to do a good job for our owners. We're here to service everyone in this industry as best we can. And I appreciate the time to talk about this.
Sure. Well, thank you, Dan. I think it's clear after this that when it comes to food and beverage facilities, especially, there's a lot to know. It's very critical that you have direct communication and clear communication with your coatings manufacturer's representative. And for Tnemec, you can find that representative at tnemec.com, and they'd be happy to come out and do an evaluation of your facility. All right. Thanks a lot, Dan. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us for Coatings Decoded.